Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. Welcome to this latest end-of-season wrap-up of Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. We've now completed 4 seasons of the pod, and this Greatest Hits episode is the 29th we've put out. Not only have we clocked up tens of thousands of listens, downloads and subscribes, not to mention all those views on our YouTube channel at Data Malarkey too, we are also in an elite club. Data Malarkey now ranks in the top 1% of all podcasts of all time. A bold claim, I know, because 99% of podcasts never get past episode 20. A proper narrative by numbers. In season 4, we've welcomed our usual Farrago and Mouse mix-up of guests. The worlds of public understanding of science, pharma, the military, logistics, football finance, and data visualization. They've all featured. This season, more than ever, we've joined the dots and aligned the planets between the radically different jobs done by our guests in the hugely diverse organisations for which they work. And yet, the way the world's leaders and leading thinkers make smarter use of data is remarkably consistent and similar, despite these very real differences. One of my favourite questions on Data Malarkey is when I ask my guests to tell them about the worst misuses of data that they've ever witnessed. Ian McGill, founder of Spend Network, a live platform which lists the $13 trillion of public sector tenders that there are around the world, as he says, from haircuts in Mexican jails to Chinese airports. Ian singled out a particularly disingenuous bit of data storytelling from former British Parliamentary Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg. So I want to know, Ian, what's the worst example of a misuse of data that you've ever observed, either in your own work or maybe perhaps more broadly in the public domain?
Well, I have to. I might be showing my cards a little bit here about my personal opinions, but one of the pieces of work that I think most rattled my cage the most was a consultation issued by the Cabinet Office as a post-Brexit consultation to bring back imperial measures. And within the consultation, you were given the choice to either have imperial measures and metric measures or imperial measures. There was no choice to retain our common status of metric measures on their own. So, and you know, you think of this as it is. I think the worst thing about it was that it was clearly a minister trying to influence what should be a really sensible bit of the state managing an economy. And if you think about the possible consequences of ensuring that imperial measures gets printed on every product that has a weight associated with it, and recalibrating scales across every supermarket and every place where you weigh product, coffee houses, whatever, across the UK, you realise that the sheer bloody-mindedness that is, preventing people from saying, please, we don't want to change this, we've got it, it works, keep going. So that is my top example of a really appalling use of data.
You opened my eyes to that one, and you haven't outed him, but I'm going to say that this is the work of the egregious Jacob Rees-Mogg, formerly leader of the House under the Johnson junta. Not that I'm revealing my cards there at all. But yeah, we'll include a link. There's a very good piece, predictably enough, from the UK Guardian. There's a very, very good piece about that. We'll include a link to that in the show notes. Tracey Brown has run the charity Sense About Science for the past 20 years. She told us about the egregious misuse of data, with less than half of all clinical trial data being reported, until her organisation spearheaded a campaign called All Trials. So, what's the worst example, Tracy, of the misuse of data that you've ever observed, either in your own career or more broadly in the public domain? I have a sense that you might want to talk about the All Trials campaign in this context.
Well, I do want to talk about the All Trials campaign because it is global and it's an egregious misuse of data. The situation was, and until very recently, that around half of clinical trials are being published, and that's probably an overestimate. When we deep dived into some of the specific areas of clinical trials, it was worse than that. And that wasn't just companies that were not reporting the full trials. It was also academics who thought that their data was for themselves to be sat in a bottom drawer or left on a computer somewhere. And there's been a big culture change through the All Trials campaign that has signed up tens of thousands of patients, doctors, researchers and others to change that and to ensure that regulations are enforced, that clinical trials should publish their results within a year. And we have seen a big change. But I think the reason why I say it's the most egregious is it's not just the case that we were not getting access to the data on the drugs we were using today. It's also that data is the baseline against which we judge new interventions. So if you're working in a company or you're academic researching and you come up with a compound that you think is going to make a contribution, that is immediately, whether or not you take that forward, is immediately compared with the drugs that exist already. Now, if the drug that exists already is understating the risk of a side effect like stroke, because all the trials aren't published on that, and we may not see the full risk, we might then think, well, our new drug has got nothing to add, right? But if we saw the true picture, that the medicines that we're prescribing today are elevating that risk, then we might see a benefit in the new compound and then take it forward to market. So we could have been missing out for years on innovations that would have been genuinely helpful in making, maybe small incremental benefits, which are then big over a world population. So that's the reason why I pick that. It's not a one-off mistake. When you ruin the baseline, you ruin everything that comes after it. But I would also highlight All Trials as a good use of data from our side, which is that, one of the great innovations now is that we can scrape the data off of the regulatory databases and actually look at how everybody's performing and show them. So league tables is just one of the best ways to get people focused on their responsibilities. And we were able to sort of shine a light, but also back at the regulators, not just at those that should have been sharing their data, but back at the regulators to say, look, you think you're regulating this effectively and you're not. So that caused, that prompted a lot of action on their part. So it was a kind of good data story. Data was our friend in the campaign. People told us at the beginning we were overestimating the problem. They told us that we were exaggerating. Of course, all the regulators see everything they need to see. Nothing to see here. Move along. No need for a campaign. And then, of course, when we started scraping that data, we just let it tell the story. It really did tell the story.
Professor of football finance and the media's go-to guy on making sense of what sense you can make out of football and money, Kieran Maguire was keen to bust some myths. Specifically, spending other people's money is a good thing, footballers are paid too much, and ticket prices for Premiership matches are too expensive. All myths that he busted from his unique finance and accounting perspective. There's a lot of nonsense, I might call it malarkey, on this podcast spoken about finance in football. What do you think are I'll give you up to 3 biggest myths about finance and football.
The 3 biggest myths is that spending somebody else's money is good. It's as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to success, and this is success at a personal level, at a corporate level, at a football level, or lack of success, it comes down to 3 elements. One of which is resources, and clearly financial resources plays a big part there. So in the main, a big hitter will defeat a small hitter, but not all of the time. Then it's opportunities, and thirdly, it's decision-making. And why do some clubs overreach or underreach benchmarked against their financial parameters? It is due to the poor quality or the good quality of decision-making. So first of all, I would say that from my point of view, the belief which is held within the media and therefore transfers itself to social media, and I'm, for my sins, I am active on social media, again trying to get the numbers across, to explain why things are taking place. So I'd say that's the biggest myth. The second biggest myth would be that wages of footballers are too high. And I look at market data, and if you take a look at the elite in any particular industry, they are paid elite rates. So, my background ultimately is that of finance. I teach bankers, I teach lawyers, I teach accountants, and they are very well remunerated, and they are very well remunerated into their 40s, 50s, and 60s when footballers have all retired. So I fight the corner for professional footballers' wages, because I feel that it is a constant misrepresentation. If anybody was fortunate enough to have their particular skill set, why accept X when somebody's willing to pay you 3X? If somebody comes along from Riyadh University and says to me, Kieran, we're going to pay you £1 million a year for teaching football finance, are you going to take it? The answer is going to be yes, and it is driven by money. And that doesn't mean that I don't have a social conscience. That doesn't mean that I agree 100% with the ethos of that country. But if I'm honest, I don't agree 100% with the ethos of the current UK government on a wide range of issues. But I wouldn't necessarily decide to move elsewhere just because of that. So players' wages, I think, is the second biggest myth. And the third biggest myth, and this does get me into a lot of hot water, is that ticket prices are too cheap. And again, I go back to bog standard sort of economics 101. The Premier League sells 99% of all of its seats at present price levels. There are huge waiting lists for season tickets. There are scrambles every time tickets go on sale for Manchester United and Liverpool and Chelsea and the bigger clubs. And they get sold out. So we would normally use the pricing mechanism as a way of dealing with that. As a consumer of the product, as a believer that football is opera for the working class, I want prices to be lower. But football clubs could make a lot more money from much higher ticket prices. And I think what we will see in due course, given that I think there's a limited upside in terms of the other two main areas of revenue, which is broadcast and commercial, is that with the increased number of US investors in English football, unfortunately, the punter, the fan, is going to be squeezed more and more in terms of what they are expected to pay to watch their heroes.
John McFall has worked in both the military and on Civvy Street, with 18 years in operations and logistics in the RAF, from Basra to Kandahar, to 6 years running Amazon Web Services in Europe. My obsession with joining the dots between different sectors was realised in a single person in John, and he was particularly instructive on both the similarities and the differences between these two domains.
So what could business learn from the military? One of the challenges within the civil area can be one of buying into a strategic vision or a strategic notion. A large number of times employers are just that. They're just an employer. And yes, the employer will want to have a culture, and they will create various posters of cats with little smiley faces, and they will put terms underneath them to create that notion of something bigger than the employees themselves, something there, something that is meaningful, doing good in the world. But organizations can be pretty poor at that, especially very traditional businesses that don't really get the whole challenge around retaining and recruiting talent. And they find themselves in this continuous circle of going, well, we are insert X and we are the world's leader of insert whatever it is. That's not good enough anymore. People are coming to work because, and they can choose where they work. People are coming to work because they want to improve the world. They want, so it's the usual story. Am I learning? Then I'll stay and work. Am I earning? Then I might choose to stay and work. But earning on its own with no learning is not going to result in a long-term hire and a long-term retention. So we have to encourage organizations, as the military does, to, and I use the term indoctrinate. I don't mean it in the sort of the nasty ways in which people would often refer to it, but to indoctrinate people into the culture of your organization. But that means that the culture of the organization can't be something you simply dream up. It has to be, people have to believe it. It's not, they have to believe it. People have to drink from the Kool-Aid, and they have to recognize that this is a organization that is there for the greater good of whatever it's going to be. And we see the agility of startups in this space because they're able to create that environment. But there is a challenge, and this is where militaries can also help teach society. The challenge is that there's some golden rules about team leadership, and it's math again. One person can directly influence 3 other people quite easily. One person can lead through persuasion and just simply force of character, circa 12 people, quite comfortably. But once you start getting into a magic number approaching somewhere around 80 to 90, your personality and your ability to just simply cut around and drive innovation starts to wane quickly. And this is the point at which bureaucracy is important. Because at the point at which we're going to get above this magic number, and you see it, whether it be Roman legions that were never actually 100, so a centurion was never actually 100. It was always about 70, 80, 90. For this I could argue for this very reason, because once you get into the 100, it becomes really typical. So there's an awkward number between sort of 12 and 14, often referred to as the Judas group, for those from a Christian sort of background. And then there's an awkward number where we start breaking beyond that sort of 80, 90 number. But it gets even harder, because once you get up to an organization that's circa 1,200 people, now we're into a very different dynamic. For organizations below about 1,200, chances are you're going to feel familiar. There will be people that you will have seen around on tea breaks and coffee breaks and lunch breaks, and it's like a small town. You're just familiar. You don't know everybody, but Mrs. Miggins always walks her dog down the street at about this time. So you've got that sort of familiarity. But once you get above that number, it changes again, because a lot of that familiarity goes. So at that sort of small unit commander, 80 to 90 people, there are challenges around building processes to lead your team effectively. When you get to 1,200, those processes are going to be tested, meaningfully tested, as to whether you can actually manage that unit. But once you get beyond 1,200 and you're now dealing with, the lobs of several thousand at a time, it's all mechanisms. All mechanisms. And just to be super clear in this whole agenda, in case someone thinks that the cultural discussion I was having earlier supersedes that, it really doesn't. Because the one thing that we should always remember is that good intentions don't work. Okay? Good intentions don't work. So that means that if I've got an organization of circa 3,000 people, and what I want is for that 3,000 people to increase production by, say, 1%, which would seem to be a reasonable thing to ask. Every one of those people that come to work already think they're working hard, already think they're part of an organization that's great because, John's created this culture and it's absolutely fantastic. So, not that I can do that. But as a result, all these people think they're already working hard. So asking them to work harder is going to have no improvement in performance. So that means that you have to have a mechanism to be able to actually drive an improvement. And that could mean, for instance, forcing people to use a particular tool to record the hours that they're working with customers so that you can see the total utilization if you were in a professional services organization. Or it could be because we want to increase diversity hiring. It could be a mechanism that deliberately counts the visible diversity within the workforce so that you can actually call out which parts of the organization are growing and which organizations are not growing. But either way, good intentions don't work. And that's something that, again, can be taught from the military into the civil area. because the military does not depend upon, individuals' good intentions, and instead has got a very structured bureaucratical system that is designed to drive forward programmatically decisions that are taken.
Terrific stuff. I love your magic numbers. And the point about the Roman centurion is very well made. I've seen from a psychological standpoint argued before that the reason that typical pre-agricultural conurbations, if you want to call them that, villages were typically no more than 150 people is because that's about the number that the human brain can actually remember the intimate details of the interrelationships between. And once you get, as you say, to that 1,200 figure, then you're into a different area. In a separate section, John gave great detail and clarity on what unites and divides the military and civvy street. Now listen, could you give us a quick thumbnail sketch? I'm interested in the world of logistics in both the military and in business. But could you maybe give us some key similarities and differences between those two environments in which you've worked?
Sure, and let's sort of reflect upon the similarities for just a moment. So, a bit like any environment, one of the key things about supply chain is how you choose to define it. And if you take the broadest definition, meaning end-to-end, from point of extraction through to manufacture, through consumption, ultimate utilization, and then the reverse logistics for end-of-life management, then in some regards, this is the same problem that all organizations have. And the challenges around end-tier supplier integration, so understanding what your supply base is, who it comprises of, where are they located, what risks you have within that, is pertinent whether you are manufacturing fighter jets or whether you're manufacturing training ships. The challenge is the same for both of them. And that is that in the end, your tier one supply base, those that are closest to you, you have a good billing relationship with them. You've got a good personal relationships with them. You understand who they are. You understand the contractual obligations. But getting behind that tier one, getting into the tier threes, the tier fours, that's hard because there are contractual reasons why your suppliers are not going to want to expose who the various components are, which means that ultimately you can have a huge amount of overlap at that level. So you might have, all of the tier one suppliers using the same tier four supplier for a particular widget. And that, of course, exposes you to risk that you can't see. So from that aspect, a huge amount of similarity in terms of the supply base. The other thing that is remarkably similar is to do with finance, and it's to do with the funding of your procurement strategy. And whether you are dealing with a business that is required to remain profitable, or whether you're doing business with a public sector organization that is held to account by the taxpayer, the same challenges are true. Are you procuring using a capital expenditure sort of model where you're effectively trying to buy the entire thing upfront in one payment or one transaction or one known cost? Or are you procuring using a use by or how could we describe it? A pay-per-use model. And if you reflect upon the industry that I'm now focused on, cloud computing, especially at the AWS remit, is very much a pay-per-use model. And that is a fundamental difference from how most people are accustomed to procuring things like their technology. So I share that because this is true whether you're trying to purchase a fighter jet, whether you're going to lease the number of hours that it's going to provide, are you going to buy the jet outright and do the full servicing yourself, et cetera, et cetera. All of those are very similar, whether you're talking about military aspects or civil. Other things that are also very similar is to do with the individuals and the involved in the management of the supply chain and the logistics. These are not different beasts. They tend to be people that are very analytical in nature. They tend to have a very clear view as to the data requirements, and they tend to want to manage things in a data way. And I say tend to want to quite deliberately, because more often than not, entire operations are actually underpinned by one critical tool, and that is Microsoft Excel. So you can have mass operations where we are talking about the movement of large quantities of people, maybe for a humanitarian operation, or you could be talking about a multi-billion-dollar business that is involved in moving bulk fuel around the world. In both of those cases, when you really dig into the detail, what you tend to find is that despite all the sophisticated planning software, tools, and applications that exist, in the end, you've got column A to column Z with a whole bunch of rows and people making up various macros to evaluate what's going on. Ultimately, the problem with that is that because your entire operation is underpinned by Excel, is that you have all sorts of issues with data sharing, data quality, and that ultimately causes tribal knowledge and tribal challenges when it comes to then subsequently managing the strategic operation that you're involved in. So I share that because all of the similarities, both the positives and the negatives, exist. In terms of key differences, well, there are industries that have got parallels with defense, but if we focus on one ultimate difference is that in a business, it's about profitability. And therefore, that profitability can drive things like inventory optimization. So if you take an organization world-renowned for inventory optimization, such as the motor industry, automotive, what you'll find there is that just on time is critical. But in a military context, just on time would always be too late because we don't know what's going to happen. And therefore, we have to store to a contingency planning. So what we end up with is detailed contingency plans and the ability to hold large quantities of inventory on hand just in case. There are challenges with that, but I'm sure you'll think some of those out with me in a moment. So that would be a key difference, is that the bulk storage of inventory is something that would be problematic for most industry. Now, I don't want to be oversimplifying because the truth is the huge majority of organizations in the defense space are civil organizations, all of whom will seek to optimize their own inventory. So I'm talking specifically about military, supply chain, military logistics in this grasp. The other aspect is that in the civil context, an awful lot of what's going on are knowns. So we know where the stores are. We know where our distribution centers are. We know the paths that we can take to travel between them. We know the quantity of trucks available, et cetera, et cetera. Where in a military context, it's entirely possible, if we're talking about a fluid operation, that we don't yet know where the warehouses are going to be. We don't yet know which paths and routes we can take. We don't yet know which paths and routes are currently safe to move along. And we also have challenges around optimizing inventory. But what is also problematic there is that human lives are at risk in every logistics operation that we conduct. And whether we look at counterinsurgency operations where logistics patrols are heavily targeted, or when you look at sort of more full-scale war, if you look at what's happening with Russia and Ukraine today, what you will also see is that the logistics nodes are fundamentally targeted, whether that be main supply routes, MSRs, or whether that be critical components such as bridges, infrastructure such as railway terminals, or indeed even the logistics posts themselves. So in those instances, you could have your inventory destroyed. You could be denied the ability to use particular bridges, paths, routes, and vehicle movements. So from that perspective, that is a fundamental difference between the military and civil context.
Mark Montgomery runs integrated insights for the top 3 global pharma business, Novartis. I asked Mark what he believed to be the best way to move from insight to action. What do you think is the best way of getting individuals, teams, whole organizations to move from insight to action?
This is one of my favorite topics at all, because it's really about insight to action. And it's how do we shape insights that you can execute on? It is at the root of what we need to do as insights professionals. It actually goes back one step, Sam, in my thoughts. It's really what is an insight versus a data point. And we need to upskill individuals and teams and organizations to move past data points and move to insights. Because often we can move off of the wrong data point in the wrong direction, which is not an insight. And so getting to the point where we're truly communicating what insights are and aligning teams on what they are and what they're not is the first step in that journey. The second step for me comes down to one simple thing. What is the answer we're trying to solve? And once you get to that questioning point of view or the business problem you're trying to solve, it becomes very powerful of why do you want this information would be the additional question. how are you going to change the business with this information? What will this do for our customers? And is this even a priority? In the insights business, we have a backlog of things to solve constantly. Is this a priority now? And if I do solve it, what are you going to do with it? How are we going to move on? And is this the right use of our time? So answering those questions even before you move into analysis, even before you stand up a study, is so important. And that sets you up for action because you already had the conversation before you put any investment in. And then understanding that this is a process, and as you go through shaping your insights, you focus on what's meaningful and measurable. You need to understand that two goes hand in hand. It could be meaningful, but if I can't measure a change on the back end, is it worth moving on? And those two go hand in hand. And as I said before, collaboration is key. It is a team sport, and you do have a ripple effect as you read the business together. And if you get used to this team sport, it's like rugby. Everybody's playing different parts of the field, but you all have to come together for the scrum. Read the business as a scrum. That will inspire action of others, and that's a very powerful. The final thing, going back to our design thinking conversation, that's really a great way to bring insights to action. I've used that quite a lot in my career to inspire go-to-market strategy, business strategy, new product development, and marketing capabilities as well as creative. It's a great way to stitch it all together in a collaborative way that's breaking down the normal barriers in an organization and bringing that designer's mind to everything we do. So those are a couple of the steps that I like to apply for insights action.
Mark was also illuminating when talking about how to align the planets and make sense of multiple different sources of data.
Yeah, Sam, this is one I'm really passionate about. It starts with defining what an insight is for me. And to break it down, I use very simple approach to insight. It's an accurate, meaning, intuitive understanding of a person or thing that compels action or either explains action. So there has to be what is the meaningful, intuitive understanding, the aha moments that really drive you to want to do something or explains why something actually occurred. If done correctly, an insight is all about the what, why, and what to do in a very compelling way that you just know it's the right thing to do and move forward in a business. And being involved in integrated insights, it's about stitching all that information together. Insights is a discipline and a process. And for us in Novartis and my team, it really starts with what is the business question we're trying to solve? But it goes beyond that because there's surface questions. And as an insights professional, the curiosity kicks in. I really want to get to the problem behind the problem. And the very basic 5 why strategy in questioning to really understand the real question or business problem we need to solve. From there, what I like to start doing is going, what do I already know? And this involves a heavy amount of desktop research, framing up hypotheses, and quickly putting an academic rigor into everything you do. Can you bring a hypothesis alive to go to the next level, or can you shoot it down with the knowledge that you already have in-house? The third step in the process that we look at when we're integrating insights is really what data do we have to support our hypothesis, to validate it, or answer the next level questions. Remaining in the data world, building off of the knowledge we already have. And then if you still can't answer the question, it's great. Go into market research. Let's talk to people. There's a human element to what we do in shaping insights. And it's really understanding people and looking at what the needs are. The data takes us so far, the desktop takes us so far, but then we can triangulate that with research. That all starts coming together, and then it gets a little bit more complicated because you might get that aha moment in one piece of research or one integrated insight. And then you have to understand how that ripple effects through all aspects of the business. Everything is connected in insights by a red thread, often not seen. And as an insight professional, it's not enough just to serve up that aha moment. It's to understand the impact of it, to the business across all parts.
I'm always interested to discover from my guests how they got into doing what they do. Mike Bell is the first data visualizer we've interviewed in our first 4 seasons. And the genesis of his decision to use the iconography of the London Underground to tell the history of rock and roll, films and politics is right out of left field, rather like the man and his very unusual brain.
What else could I do? And what else is a connection? What else interconnects? And for some reason, it struck me musical histories, albums, the story of albums and that pathway. And there's something we're losing anyway with streaming and our need to drop in and out of a song. We no longer hold an album and play an album, unless you're going back into vinyl, which is more prevalent. So I challenged myself, and the toughest band I could think of was The Fall, with a story about Mark E. Smith sacking everybody. And I went down that route. So I started there for no reason apart from to challenge myself, not as a design project to make money, not as a possible poster project or anything like that. No, it was never meant to go on a T-shirt. It hasn't gone on a T-shirt, but that's where I started with it.
So so you weren't I like your choice. Go difficult, and then after that things may be more straightforward. But you mentioned when we first met that the Fall community of fans were constructive, but perhaps a little bit pedantic in helping you get to the final finished product.
Yeah, I had a go, and I'm on Twitter X, and I posted up. There's a hashtag Fall Friday, which is the day of the week. Yes. Yeah. So I posted up there, and lots of responses came in, and it took 13 attempts to get it right, according to the fans. But at which point they then said, "Oh, can we buy it?" And I thought, okay. So I then sat there with my other websites, which were about other things. Had to set up a shop, so I went and did that. Never run an online store before. So I did that from scratch, and just started learning about that, as well as mapping more and more and more. So currently at 50 bands, although I have researched another 50 again and ready to start mapping. And I think it's a research bit which is as interesting as the plotting, I think, for you guys.
More interesting yet is how Mike has used his unique brain to hold his Alzheimer's diagnosis in check.
It was about 8 or 9 years ago. I had first symptoms. I'd been working silly hours through the night, and there was a lot of big rundown. I wasn't in a good place on many levels, relationship and everything else. But this diagnosis came through. You worry. You think, what am I going to do about it? I did take drugs initially because they were just thrown at me with a pile of drugs. You took more drugs because of the drug side effects. I was in a dreadful state physically, but what I didn't want to do was lose my mental capacity. And the consultant said, you're doing a good job with your design work. That's brilliant because you're learning about everything. You're getting involved. You're making things. You're finding things out in order to get these designs happening. For all the shows and stuff. So the show work was feeding me, but very much I wanted something else to just keep my brain going each day. I actually started off writing, it sounds mad, but writing poetry every day. There's 2,700 poems of mine online at the moment. And that for me, it's like doing a crossword every day, but I hate crosswords, so it was an alternative. But then I started, with lockdown, and my show work disappeared, and I was living alone by then. It was pretty terrifying. Your political side stuff aside, living off savings and stuff, and not getting any support. I'd come off of drugs by then. I'd started getting fitter. I was approaching the mental thing a lot more positively, and I saw that there was an opportunity, possibly, to stretch myself, and that's how I started the mapping. Was partly to keep myself engaged. And the consultant said, it is a case of not just because you've got Parkinson's, but for any of us, aging is you've got to engage mentally and learn, and be always looking out for something to push your mind. So be it learning a language or whatever, that's what we're told to do now, and we got to do it. All of us got to do it. So the Parkinson's was like a wake-up call. It was a great insight into getting old. Because once I came off the drugs and just used other strategies like just a healthier living, living the kind of life I wanted to live, I've refixed myself, and this is me. It's me again. It's me. I'm doing this. I've got to do it. No one else is going to do it. It's the good stuff has come out of that. Good stuff's come out of Parkinson's. Good stuff's come out of lockdown eventually. And I'm in a very positive frame of mind, which is another aspect to learning and relearning. It keeps you mentally healthily open-minded about stuff.
For Kieran Maguire, the route from accountancy to being a professor of football finance was different and no more prosaic or predictable.
I was a rubbish accountant. I absolutely loathed it. Because I thought it was all to do with numbers, where actually it's to do with being an advisor, communication skills, networking, all of the things which I am sadly lacking. I've always wanted to teach. When I went to university in Manchester in 1980, I thought, blimey, I'd like to do what those guys do, but never thought I'd be good enough. Never thought I'd manage to get an opportunity. And just had one of those sliding doors moments where I was teaching at a private college. Local university was short of people for a night school. They approached us, and then on the back of that, they offered me a full-time job. And as for the switch to football finance, again, just one of those very weird things. I was teaching at a bank. I sort of, during the summers, I tend to sort of butterfly from position to position. So I was teaching at a bank, and all of a sudden the doors were closed and the shutters went down, and 4 big burly bouncers appeared on the front door. And I said, "What's going on here, chaps?" They said, "Well, one of our clients, the Glazer family, have just bought Manchester United Football Club, and we think there could be a bit of a negative reaction from the fan base." So on the back of that, I was travelling back to Manchester. I was in London at the time. The BBC phoned up the university, said, "Is there anybody who can explain this?" And the university said, "Well, we've got this guy. He's supposed to be teaching finance, but all he does is talk about football in class. And the students don't moan about it, so we let him get him away. Let him get on with it." So I got booked in for the BBC breakfast to explain leverage buyouts, how the finance works, and so on. And I think in the world of broadcasting, it works. Provided you don't mess up, you go on to the list. The next time a story comes in, they'll give you a phone call for radio or TV or whatever it's going to be. And things have just mushroomed from there to the extent that I'm on target to do around about 800 interviews today. I mean, we're recording this at midday on a Friday. I've already done 4 radio interviews, and I've got some more lined up. I mean, this is transfer deadline day, so it tends to be a bit crazy, but it's great fun. But ultimately, I'm just a teacher, and I love teaching, and I love teaching my subject. I would do it for no money. Don't let my boss hear that, because otherwise I might be called into the office and see if I'll put that into practice.
5, 10, even 15 years ago, there was almost a fetish about the bigness of big data, with the term always capitalised in a very un-English way. I was keen to know if Tracey Brown believed that bigger was necessarily better data. Do you believe that big data is necessarily better data?
No. And I think that's actually, talking about misconceptions, that's actually a misconception we need to deal with. One of the key things that we found ourselves explaining as we sort of rolled out the public guide, and subsequently we've rolled out a number of other collaborations around that, has been that the key question is to, first of all, establish whether the data was collected. I don't know whether you're a plural or a singular show for data, but data were collected to answer the question. Because there's a lot of excitement around, we talked about with people not understanding, but you do have a bit of things at the other end of a bit of the opposite, which is sometimes people imagine that the data will just be there for you to answer exactly the question that you've got. And if you've got great big data sets, if you've been gathering all the information, for example, that we now know in real time what the usage of a metro system is, how much people are paying for their tickets when they're traveling, and all of that, we can track all of those things, and we've got a lot of data. So people imagine that that's actually designed in such a way that you can just ask any question of it. And they don't realise the research process where you would actually think about the biases that exist in that data set, That you'd remind yourself in doing this that you're only looking at a past. That's the whole point about data is always past. We're always looking at the past, which means that we've always got to apply a lens of thinking what was going on then that might not be going on tomorrow. And that's those simple understandings, I think, are really, really important as we approach data sets. And then we think, okay, it's not about the size of the data. The size sometimes counts, but it's about understanding how well the data answers the question. And there are times when a small study where the data is gathered in a way that has anticipated all the biases and the limitations and mistakes and ensured that you're actually getting data that answer the question rather than a proxy question. For example, you might want to find out whether somebody is experiencing ongoing pain following a treatment intervention, but you may be reading something such as their doctor visits, follow-up visits. Well, you can do that on the largest data set out there, the largest patient data set. But if the doctor visits weren't representative of ongoing pain, but they were perhaps as a result of some stomach upset instead, that was caused by the same intervention, you're not measuring the thing you're measuring. So no matter how big it gets, in fact, if anything, the bigger it gets, the more the distortion occurs. And that's also another point about big, is that sometimes you introduce into your data set a whole range of considerations that you haven't allowed for, or that mean you move further away from answering your question. So I think big is not always better. I wonder whether we've ended up in a place where there's an assumption that big is better because of the number of unrepresentative samples that were used in the past. That became a regular criticism that was levied at, people would rush to say that some new thing was going to cause a risk to your health, or they'd rush to sort of produce their results from their study into a media report. And those things were not representative. And so we all learned, in a good way, I think, throughout the noughties, we all learned to ask the question, is this a representative sample? And so in the process, kind of big became good. And big is not necessarily good.
We started this roundup of the greatest hits of Season 4 with Spend Network's Ian McGill, singling out Jacob Rees-Mogg for his willful misuse of data. Let's return to Ian to close out this episode with a rather more positive take, this time with the respect and kudos he has for data storytelling under COVID, particularly from John Murdoch of the Financial Times.
I've been thinking about this, and I really think that some of the work that was done on COVID and analysis of the data in relation to COVID, in the open, out loud work where people were saying, here are the shortcomings, I really thought was very impressive. And the work that was done in Taiwan and South Korea, putting up case maps literally overnight. South Korea have this very interesting minister for digital who was able to work with hackers overnight one night, just on a Reddit group, to put up a lot of maps for case rates and concern to help citizens understand where they could get test kit and other things. So really, really impressive work. And that was done for free overnight by a bunch of hackers. At the same time, you've got John Murdoch at the FT, who really delved right into the difficulty of getting data. And he started with the sort of trying to estimate case rates and got quite sophisticated charts and fan charts and things going. And then actually very quickly, I think in consequence, started measuring excess deaths around COVID, because it was a much, much more reliable mechanism for understanding the pandemic. So he'd done all of this work that was really quite sophisticated, and he just went, no, we can't rely on it. It's not good enough data. I'm going to go to a simpler but more illustrative version. I thought that was really interesting. There's a really being led by the quality of the data and the quality of analysis was very, very important. And I thought that, they were John Murdoch, if you don't follow him in the FT, do, because he's a really insightful data analyst and journalist.
So there we have it. Season 4 is a wrap. And as usual, very much more than crumbs of intelligence in how to move from data to insight and from insight to action. And that's a theme that we will be touching on a lot more in Season 5 and beyond. We're taking our customary 2-week break now, and we'll be back with Season 5 on Wednesday the 8th of May. And do we have a great treat for you? Our first guest of the new series has sat right at the top of our wish list since we started planning the podcast on a summer holiday in August 2022. And I'm delighted to reveal that Season 5 opens with a brilliant discussion with the statistician of his generation, Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, the Emeritus Professor of Statistics at the University of Cambridge. If anyone can have been said to have had a good pandemic, it was David. And the work he's done on the public understanding of risk, evidence, and uncertainty being the theme of his new book, in data and statistics in the past 40 years is the stuff of legend. Other guests next season come from the worlds of risk and evidence communication, marketing effectiveness, corporate responsibility, academic publishing, financial analytics, and autism. As ever, any suggestions for guests? If you think you could be a good guest, or if you know or work with someone who tell a great story about how they make smarter use of data, drop us an email at hello@usingdatasmarter.com or complete the application form at https://www.usingdatasmarter.com/guest. I look forward to welcoming you back for more data-driven common sense soon, with the Data Malarkey podcast dropping every other Wednesday on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube Music. The new name or home for what, until the 2nd of April, was Google Podcasts. And video episodes go live a week later on our YouTube channel at Data Malarkey. Thanks so much for listening. Do like, subscribe, share, rate, with 5 stars naturally, on your favourite podcast platform. The first 4 seasons have been such fun to research, create, and publish. But as I say, as I always reflect, I think we're only just getting started. Thanks for your attention, and thanks for your consideration.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.